Hello, everybody. This is Punfriggle Streamer. I want to talk about a really nice feature of the OBSBot Tail 2, and that is the ability to transfer audio and video over NDI protocol. So let's talk about NDI and what it's going to give you with the OBSBot Tail 2. Now, I have some things I want to talk about. First of all, I'm going to discuss what is NDI. I want to talk about how you can set it up using the Tail 2. I want to talk about the best practices that I've personally learned when integrating the Tail 2 into my personal workflows, whether here or at church. And then we'll close with what I think you should do if you're looking at buying the Tail 2 and some things you need to know about the NDI license. So let's get into it. All right, so what is NDI? Well, let's talk about it because NDI is really nice. It came out not too terribly long ago, but it was something that was really more for really professional productions. And it was a network device interface. This is a protocol that was designed by NewTek back in the day. But since then, it has really gained a lot of interest in the consumer space and the more affordable production space. And so with NDI, it gives you the ability to transfer audio and video over your network, whether it be through wired or through Wi-Fi. So currently I have a couple different cameras. I have two Tail 2s and a Tail Air set up through NDI. One will be on wired. The other Tail 2 would be on Wi-Fi. And then I have the Tail Air also wired through the USB dongle that you can buy separately with the Tail Air. So what you're currently looking at is you're looking at a Tail 2. This is Wi-Fi 4K 30. Okay, so it gives you an idea what it looks like. And this is transmitting video, high definition, ultra high definition over my Wi-Fi currently. Okay, it's Wi-Fi 6 is what I have here in the studio, which the Tail 2 supports, along with Tail Air. And you can see that, you know what, the video is not terrible. It looks really good. Now, currently using this in AI tracking mode, so you can see that the camera is tracking me. But NDI is a nice protocol if you're using it on local networks, okay? NDI is a free protocol that you can download free tools for to help in your workflows and your productions. But with the Tail 2 and the Tail Air, you have to buy an NDI license, and they're typically around $89 to $100. I think they're $89 for the Tail 2s. So if you're looking at using this NDI protocol, it does come with extra cost, and that is something that you do need to consider. But NDI is a great way to get, video to your different devices through your local network. And because the Tail 2 support PoE+, it's one cable that does everything for you if you have a PoE+ capable switch. So NDI, how can you use it in your workflows? Well, I think it's pretty easy because in OBS, for instance, which is what I'm using right now, you can get the free plugin that you can download and install in OBS, and then you get native NDI support right there in your broadcast software. There's plenty of other broadcast softwares out there that also support NDI, including vMix, Streamlabs OBS, Prism Live Studio. That's just to name a few. There's tons of instances, and there's also hardware devices, switchers, and that sort of thing that also support NDI. So NDI is a great protocol. There's a ton of tools out there, including a webcam app. So if you have software that does not support NDI, but you do have the ability to use video devices, then this will mimic and turn NDI sources up to 4, and if you're using Windows, into a webcam. So you do have that option too. So there's tons of ways that you can use NDI in your workflows. All right, so how do we set up NDI inside of OBSBot Center software or OBSBot Start? So let's go and I'll show you OBSBot Center software. It's basically the same setup inside of the Start app on your mobile device too. But I'll show you how it's set up inside of Center, and I'll show you some little differences between the Tail Air and the Tail 2 I think you really need to know about. So let's get into that. All right, so let's talk about setting up Tail 2 for your broadcast. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to do when you get inside of OBSBot Center is you need to look at making sure your connections are proper. So if you have Tail 2 and Tail Air, and you got them hooked up to your wired and wireless network, you're going to have a couple of options to be able to choose which connection you want to use. So you can see here for the tail air, I have it selected to wired. For the tail 2, I have it selected to wired, but for this tail 2, I have it for Wi-Fi. So you do have that ability. Just simply click on the down arrow and you can choose which one you want to use. Second thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to, first of all, if you do not have a license, you're going to have to buy it and you're going to have to activate it and enter the license in through the center app here. But once you have it activated, it'll let you know that, and then you'll have the ability to turn this NDI mode on. Again, this is under the More section or More tab on OBSBot Center. Now, there's something you need to know. When NDI is enabled, you cannot change the media settings on it, but I will turn the tail air off since we're not using it. And then you can see what the media settings will be for the tail air. So once you open up, have media settings available, you can go into NDI and RTSP settings and then select the resolution you want, whether it be 720p, 1080p, or 4K. You can set the bit rate, low, medium, or high, and then you can use the encoder. Now, I do highly recommend, just based on experience, that you try to use H.265. I just think it'll get a smoother stream and still you're able to maintain quality with lower bit rate. And then obviously up here, you can change the frame rate from 30 to 60, depending on what resolution you're in. Now, Tail 2 is great because Tail 2 supports 60 frames up to 4K, whereas the Tail Air, you're limited to 4K 30 or 1080p 60. So another difference between NDI, between the Tail 2 and the Tail Air, let me turn NDI mode off here so you can look at the Tail 2 settings, is if you go to media settings here, you can see that I have the ability to adjust bit rate, fine control of bit rate with NDI encoding. So under NDI and RTSP, again, you have the same selections for H.264, 265, your resolution of 720p, 80, 1080p, or 4K. But here you can also select 60 frames per second. But the big difference, and I want you to note this is very important, why I think Tail 2 is such a great option for NDI, is you can really fine tune your bit rate here. Okay. This is a big deal if you're going to be using Wi-Fi, because unfortunately, you're not going to get great performance out of Wi-Fi like you would over wired. So if you're going to do a 1080p 60 stream, which I would highly recommend if you're going to do Wi-Fi, you really tune this bit rate down to a good streaming bit rate that you would be able to use over your Wi-Fi. Okay. Now, if you're using wired, you can pretty much full send on your bit rate, no problem, with provided you have a gigabyte switch. That is the biggest differences between NDI setup between inside of OBSBot Center. Now, you have the exact same selections in OBSBot Start, so it would be kind of pointless for me to go over that. But now what you would do is inside of your broadcast software, which I have right here, you would actually go and add an NDI source. Okay, so you have the NDI plugin source here, and then you would just basically go in and select an NDI source. If you have a new one, if you have a source that's new that you have not added to another scene, then you can go in here and create new. But here you can see I have 3 NDI sources that are available, and I can bring them up. Now, once you have your NDI source selected, obviously here you have different options for your source name. You do have the ability to choose visibility options. You have the ability to choose the bandwidth options here, whether you want highest or lowest bandwidth or audio only. You also have here where if you want to use source time code or your timestamp. You can also do frame sync, which is a beta function right now inside of OBS Studio. You can also use hardware acceleration, or you can request it if it's available. And then obviously down here, you can select your latency. So you got normal, which is your default, low, and then lowest or unbuffered. And what this will do, well, if you use normal, it's going to add latency to your video, and you're going to have to offset that with your audio or sync it with your audio. Under latency or lowest, if your network can support it, I would highly recommend this because it basically syncs up your audio and your video. There's near zero latency with this, very minimal. So you don't have any desyncing with your audio and video. Also down here at the bottom, you do also have the ability to do PTZ controls. Now I can't use that right now because I'm actually in AI mode right now. So, but you do have the ability to control pan tilt and zoom right here inside of OBS. Okay. So that's just an easy way to set up NDI inside of the Start app and then inside of your broadcast software. All right, so let's talk about some of the best practices for using NDI with your Tail 2. So what I have is I have a few comparisons that we can look at of the different NDI options. I have a Tail 2 that's connected wired. I have the other one that is connected via Wi-Fi. And then I have the Tail Air that is also wired. And you can just kind of see the differences. So first of all, let's do a side-by-side of the Tail 2s. So now you're seeing both Tail 2s. Again, this one right here, the one here on the left, is on Wi-Fi 6. And then this one here, all the way up here at the top, is connected through Ethernet. Okay, so the great thing about Tail 2 is it has a full-size Ethernet port, 1 gig Ethernet port on the back of the camera that you can just plug in a regular Ethernet cable. You don't need any extra adapters like you would do with the Tail Air, but you do have the ability to hook up either wired or Wi-Fi. And so what I've done, and this is why I think it's key that you understand why Tail 2 is so good. On wired, you can send all this bit rate, but what I've done with the Wi-Fi Tail 2 is I've actually dropped the bit rate down so you get a nice, smooth NDI source over Wi-Fi. If I had the bit rate set up the same as I did with the wired Tail 2, then you would see that there'd be a lot of frame skipping, encoding issues, because unfortunately, Wi-Fi just cannot handle that much bit rate typically. Okay, so that's the problem. This is key because if you are in a church or a conference room or something where you're on a Wi-Fi that you don't have dedicated control over and other people are on it, this could cause a lot of issues. And that is definitely the case with us at our church. I do not have a dedicated Wi-Fi just for our media sources. We share Wi-Fi with everybody in the auditorium. So at any time, there could be over 100 or so devices connected to our Wi-Fi outside of our normal media stuff. So I have to be very careful with the Wi-Fi. And I have to make sure that I can adjust the bit rate down enough to where it is nice and smooth and still looks good. But the great thing about the fact that the Tail 2s and the Tail Air 2 uses NDI HX3, which is a compressed NDI. You can do a lot with it with minimal amounts of bit rate compared to the uncompressed version of NDI. So that's a great thing that they've done here with OBSBot, is given that HX3 compatibility, which is wonderful. So here we have the two Tail 2s. You can kind of see the difference between the two, and now I'll move around and you can kind of see that the Wi-Fi version still is not quite as smooth as the wired, and the wired 2 for some reason is being a little jerky. I don't know. That's kind of weird. Typically it's very smooth, but you have that. Now let's go to all three. You can kind of compare the three. Again, I've got the Tail Air over wired. I have this Tail 2 over wired, and then this guy right here is over Wi-Fi. Okay. All of them are on at 4K 30, okay, right now. And they are all trying to sync up together so you can see if there's any desyncing differences between the cameras. Okay. They're all going into the same switch. And another thing I've done just to make things fair for all the cameras is I've given them the exact same image settings. So they are in autofocus for your face, or AFC for the Tail Air. Then shutter speed is in manual at 1/60. The color temperature is set to 4,300 Kelvin. Picture mode is in standard. Okay, so all your saturation, contrast, hue, and all that is set to standard, which is 50 across the board. So you can get an idea. So I've tried to color match these as close as I can and given them the exact settings so that you can actually do a comparison using NDI of any differences in color temperature and the image itself. So anyway, you can kind of get an idea of how different the Tail 2s are compared to Tail Air, because obviously the Tail 2s have a bigger sensor. They're able to perform better in lower light scenarios. Some of the best practices that I've seen as I switch over here to the Tail Air that I think is important is obviously getting your cameras tuned and remembering the best bit rate for your cameras. Now, unfortunately, with the Tail Air, you don't have this ability. You only have 3 bands of that you can change, and that's high, medium, or low for your bit rate. The Tail 2s, again, you have finite control of your bit rate, and you can really fine tune it to perform the best on your Wi-Fi or wired system. And that is exactly what I did church one day. Is I had the opportunity to go into the broadcast room during the second service when our Wi-Fi was congested with different devices, and I was able to go in, bring all the cameras up on Wi-Fi, and then fine-tune them so that they looked as good and they were nice and smooth throughout the service. Now, I come to find out, because we stream at 1080p 60, that at 1080p 60 for my Wi-Fi, about 9800 or 9.8K bits per second are really good for our auditorium using the Tail 2s in Wi-Fi. And they were a considerable distance from our router. One of the things that I was able to do is I was able to buy a laser measure, and from the cameras to where our router is about 25 feet. So there is a considerable distance, but there is there is nothing between the Wi-Fi and the cameras. They have a direct line of sight to the router. So that's a bonus. If you do not have a direct line of sight, then that might pose some problems. And that's something else you might need to consider. All right. So in closing, I mean, NDI looks really good. It works well. I think it's something that you're really going to have to play with. Now, it's not perfect. Okay. Obviously, you can tell throughout the video that every now and then there's a little bit of skipping that goes on. You're going to see that more prevalent with Wi-Fi. I can go in and fine tune these so that they do not do that, but you're going to also lose a little bit of image quality. So that's something that you need to think about. With the Tail 2, I think that you will be more happy with NDI than if you've been an owner of the Tail Air and you've had issues with NDI before. For some reason, for me, NDI just works better on the Tail 2. Obviously, having the bitrate control has a lot to do with that. But even with that, in 4K 60 on Wi-Fi, if I'm using a single camera, it works fantastic. Again, the more cameras you add, the more consideration you need to think about bandwidth and congestion on your network and that sort of thing. But overall, with HX3, you should get a nice, smooth overall video feed to your broadcast software. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. And like I said, if you got any questions about this, as you can see, again, just for a comparison of what NDI looks like on all the cameras, feel free to reach out to me and ask me any questions that you may have, as I think NDI is a great way to go on your local network. Now, if you're going to be trying to use this over a wide area network, then obviously that's where you're going to have to bring in NDI Bridge, which is a free app that comes along with your NDI tools that you can download. I've also found that running NDI Bridge may be a viable option if you do have issues with, jerkiness and stuttering, that sort of thing on your Wi-Fi network. NDI Bridge may be a way to go there, because you can really tune down and control your settings there inside of NDI Bridge, including assigning hardware acceleration, GPU encoding, that sort of thing. So, and it's also a great tool to troubleshoot, because then you can go into the stats and you can kind of get an idea of all that's going on your network with all the NDI sources that the bridge is picking up. So, in any case, everybody, I hope you have a great day. If you got any questions, again, drop a comment below. I hope you like this video. leave a like if you don't mind. And again, thank you, OBSBot, for sending me to Tail 2s and being able to just kind of show how NDI works with both of them. I have a full tutorial and a full review of the Tail 2s coming up. So if you got any questions about that and you want me to discuss those in the review or discuss those in the full tutorial for the Tail 2s, then let me know. All right, everybody, have a good one. We'll see you later.